going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. And this is our weekly show, twice weekly show, once every 2 weeks show. It's our show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are back with more Streets of New Capenna stories, specifically the side stories. And side story number 3, The Side of Freedom by Elise Kova. My quick review at the top of this one is I really enjoyed this one. Not a lot of, like, at least in my opinion, not a lot of, like, metaphor and things like that.
Right.
But it answered a ton of questions and did a really good job of advancing the overall story.
Right.
Which isn't usually what a side story does, but I was still very appreciative of it and thought it was great.
Yeah, it was interesting because when you started reading this story, you were like, oh, the writer of this one is the writer of the main stories, not of the other side stories. And I was like, huh, okay. And then when we got through the story, I was like, now I get why.
That's why, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Because it was like main plot that they were referring to in the side story.
That's right. So based on that discussion and that early quick review, if you have not gotten a chance to read the story yet and you would like to before listening to our review, we will try to pepper in what the story is about here and there. So if you don't feel like it, totally understandable. But if you do, we are trying to remove as many barriers as possible to help you to do that. And so the top link in the description down below will take you to the story so that you can read it for yourself. And then, of course, when you're done, we would love it if you would come back here and join us for more of our review or for the rest of it. But before we actually get onto that full review itself, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We hope that you're enjoying all the things that we're doing here on this channel and our other channels here at this Geek for All family of channels, as we call it. And please feel free to check out those other channels. Video Games for All, Gluten Free for All, links down in the description box below. Since the last time that we saw you for JaAR, there has been a new Gluten Free for All video.
Yes.
So you should definitely check that out. That was a lot of fun. The last video that you did last month was you actually cooking food, whereas this was just you reviewing gluten-free food products, which is something that you often have to do in your life of like, oh, all right, well, I've never tried this before, I guess I'll eat it. Oh, wow, this is amazing, or, oh, wow, okay, I'm never getting this again. So it might actually help.
Sometimes it's in the middle,
right.
You know?
Yes, exactly. And so if there is that person in your life, or you are that person in your life who cannot eat gluten, sometimes, not this particular video, but sometimes can't eat lactose, or is vegan, or something like that, those videos are super helpful, and that was kind of your goal in doing all of that. And so...
Yes, and when I originally decided to do the channel, I wasn't planning on really doing any cooking or baking at all. And then as it progressed, I was like, well, maybe I'll just kind of pepper it in. And now it's kind of gotten to a point where it's like every other month. So like every month I'll do a video, and it seems like every other month is cooking and the opposites are reviews. Yeah. So we'll see if it continues to stay that way. But that's kind of what it's at right now.
But Amy does a really good job with it, and so I encourage you to check it out. Like I said, link in the description below, and you can then check out the most recent video, but really all of the videos. And then on Video Games for All, we have multiple videos that come out each week over there. Right now we are playing through a blind playthrough of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. We are playing through Amy's first time ever playing Final Fantasy VII, seeing or playing Final Fantasy VII, and Amy's first time ever playing through Generation 3 of Pokemon, specifically Pokemon Sapphire, after Amy has already played through Pokemon Red, first time ever, never seeing it before, and Pokemon Silver, same thing. So we really encourage you to check those out. The people who are over there and watching that stuff love it, and we love them for it. So
thank you for the engagement.
Yes,
that means a lot to us, as well as it helping us out in terms of getting the videos out there.
And so while you are here or over there, please do not forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, or if you're on this channel, whenever we go live. Because last week, if you missed it, on Tuesday, we were live for 15 hours. 15.
Yes.
Because the Streets of New Capenna early access event was live, and Wizards was nice enough to give us a fully unlocked account and the ability or the option to stream for as many hours as we wanted. And, we are humans and needed sleep and stuff like that.
Right.
So we were only able to stream for 15, but...
Only.
Yes. I said only. I said it. But it was 15 hours, and we appreciate each and every one of you that stopped by there as well. What an awesome day that was. We hope that Wizards continues to do those events, first of all, and second of all, continues to have us for those, and we thank them for it. And again, if you want to check that out, the VOD of the first 12 hours of it, because YouTube is a thing, the first 12 hours of the 15, the VOD is on our channel, so you can check that out for yourselves. And then we are live every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on this channel. If you're a fan of Magic gameplay, we play MTG Arena on Mondays from 8 to 10. And then whatever video game we happen to be playing, we'll be playing on Fridays. In fact, this Friday, the day after this video goes live, we will likely, it's not certain, but it's very likely, we will be finishing up X-Men Legends 2, Rise of Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Which we've been playing for many weeks now, and we've really been enjoying. So we encourage you to come join us, especially because during that stream at some point, we are likely going to be discussing what we'll be streaming the week after. So stay tuned for that. But now that all of that is out of the way, thank you for bearing with us on that. We really appreciate any and all support that you're willing to give. It means the world.
Yes.
But now onto the full review itself, the reason why we are here. This particular story was about Vivian, and it reminded me a bit of the Ren and Seven side story that we got a few sets ago.
How so?
Because, and I'm trying to remember the set, but I can't.
But I know the story you're talking about. At least
Yes.
I do. I don't know if the audience does, but I do.
Yeah, was it must have been Innistrad. Midnight Hunt, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was. Or it was like one of the last few of the...
It was, I think it was the first side story of either Midnight Hunt or Crimson Vow. But either way, because it was Ren and Seven and Teferi. And Teferi was on Innistrad.
Maybe it was like a middling side story of Midnight Hunt.
Regardless, irrelevant.
Whatever.
But it reminded me of that because at first, my first thought was like, okay, well, like, Vivian's like part of the main story, right? So what's this side story going to be about? It's probably just like Ren and Seven, where it was a side story completely inconsequential to anything going on in the main story, and then we move on with our lives. We heard a nice, cool story, and thank you.
Right.
But it was really there just to justify the Planeswalker being included in the set, right? Because Ren and Seven was there because, hey, Ren and 6 was a very powerful card, but guess what? It was only released in a supplementary product, not in a mainline set. So here it is in the mainline set. They really exist in the world, and so, we actually get to meet this new character. Okay, but not really. Because this time around, it should have been one of the main stories. Like, it should have just been a cutaway for one of the main stories that was like, you take a week off from hearing about Elspeth, you go to Vivian, especially because it tied back into Elspeth.
Right.
And we'll talk about that. But I wrote down at the beginning of this that I was going to be looking very closely at this story to try and understand if I liked or not the fact that Vivian was working with Tezzeret. Because it seemed unlikely to me.
Right.
And it was upsetting to me. Well, not upsetting, but it would have been upsetting to me if there was no reason for it and they were just like, well, she's working with him because he was the first one to come along and she was just curious. And it's like, no, that's...
you would not have assumed if it wasn't something that you could come to expect based on their track record.
Sure, but, and it's Vivian, so like, she's very much the I work alone lone wolf.
Yeah.
And we've had that issue in the past with her where, like, why did she just, I think it was in War of the Spark, where it was like she kind of showed up out of nowhere and was very willing to, like, take orders from Gideon or whatever. And it's like, that's not who Vivian is. No. She wouldn't be okay with that. But it seems like they might be moving away from that, because here it was very much, and you used this word, so I'm gonna borrow Amy's term here. It seemed very much that it was her instinct that kept her going following Tezzeret, listening to Urabrask at all in this story, because otherwise it was like, well, I want to shoot them, but I'm not going to. I'm going to hear them out. It's like, I feel like old Vivian would have just been like, nope, pop, and just killed, like, shot to kill at least. Not necessarily auto-killed, but shot to kill. Because what the hell is any of this that's going on? Like, everything that she heard was making her more and more uncomfortable about the situation that she was in.
Yeah.
And so why was she doing it, right? And so it was something that was very confusing to me, and kind of made my, like, alarm bells go off, letting me know, like, okay, this is probably bad characterization, like we talk about a lot.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so that was something that upset me, because it was like, this is something that I need to be aware of and try to keep track of, or whatever. Well, thankfully, I suppose, it seems like Vivian, as a green mage, which makes sense, was working off of instinct. And her instinct was telling her, keep going, don't worry about it, whatever. Like, this will work out, you're doing the right thing, you're going the right places, whatever. And
and even if you're following the wrong people, you're doing it for the right reasons, and it will get you the result that is needed.
And I used the phrase alarm bells, right? That was a word or a term that was used in this story with regard to Vivian, because it was like her internal alarms were going off, being like, get out of here, stop this is bad. But another part of her was saying, no, ride it out, see it through, it'll be okay, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because, it's ironic, we met a character in this story named Navy, who is a double agent, and yet Vivian is kind of acting as a double agent here, because in working with Urabrask and attempting to find Elspeth, Vivian's like, sure, I'll do that for you. And she's not doing it actually to help Urabrask. She's doing it because she just found out that Elish Norn is afraid of Elspeth. And so to Vivian, it's like, that is somebody that I would like to get to know.
Right.
Because that is an ally against this huge threat. I think the phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, was used maybe one too many times here. But
I only remember hearing it once, but I might have blocked it out if we heard it again.
It was at least twice, and I felt like...
I hate that phrase.
I felt like the second time was a little ham-fisted. It was like, yes, we get it. Like,
Every time it's ever used, it's ham-fisted. I hate that phrase.
So, again, strategically it makes sense, and I feel like in the story they had to say it once to, like, justify it a bit, but... anytime after that it was used, I was just like, okay, we get it. Like, same thing. Like, I felt dirty. I was like, come on, that's enough.
Throw this away.
So, that was like maybe my one, like, critique about this thing. But, I also, it didn't really happen heavily, but it was nice to see a bit more of the Chaldea in the story, so that we could hear more about, like, what the underside of the city looks like, and, like, what it looks like as it's connected to the dry dirt and earth and stone on the actual old Capenna, right? That Vivian kind of assumes is what's happening, and so we get to see a bit more of that, because that's like where Urabrask is hiding out down there. Speaking
Original
of
Capenna.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Classic Capenna classic. Speaking of Urabrask, we haven't seen it yet in this story, and so I'll talk about it, but it didn't bother me as much. But, because Urabrask as a card, to my knowledge, is not in and of himself a story spotlight card. Right? So we have had complaints in the past few sets about story spotlight cards not accurately depicting what part of the story they are depicting. Because Urabrask is not a story spotlight card, I'm not going to say that I'm upset that in Urabrask's card, he's like up and jumping with his claws out, even though this whole story, he's like lying on the ground, basically like half dead.
Yeah.
And so, how the hell...
Was he laying on the ground? I thought he was like suspended or something.
No, because they said he pushed himself up to a sitting position for as long as he could, and then slumped back down to the ground as if sitting up was too much for him at that point still. But it was just like, that was a problem. And for, like, Urabrask would not be doing that. Would not be jumping and fighting and in a fighting pose. But, right, but you're not going to have, like, Urabrask the half-dead as a magic card, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes, it does.
So I understand...
Urabrask, the non-threatening. Urabrask, the only half-fleshed Phyrexian.
Yeah. The half-dead Praetor. So, like, again...
It's like a half-blood prince.
Exactly.
Not really.
Precisely. Exactly the same thing. So... That was definitely a situation where it's like, okay, I get it. I'm not actually upset about it, but it's still something that I felt like we should at least talk about. That it's Urabrask as we have not yet seen him in the story. It's possible that in a couple of stories, Urabrask will be at his full potential and will be in that attacking pose. But because we were talking about Urabrask, the picture that showed up was that picture of Urabrask. So it is inconsistent with where it showed up in the story, with how he looked in that art. But again, I can forgive it here because one, not a story spotlight. This is my opinion, of course, right? That one, it's not a story spotlight, and two, it's not Urabrask the half-dead, right? It's Urabrask, like, actually at full fighting force, and it's a mythic. So, like, you need to, like, let it be the 6/6 that it is. If Urabrask is half-dead lying on the ground, that's not a 6/6. So, I get it, but it was still something I wanted to talk about. Okay, so I wrote down the plan that Tezzeret is going for, and or that Elesh Norn is going for, and or that Urabrask is going for. And I wrote it down to the best of my ability here, so that we could talk about it a bit if we feel that it needs further discussion. So, Tezzeret has been using the planar bridge components that are inside of himself.
Which is so gross and weird.
I
had forgotten that it was like that.
Yeah.
And Joe was like, you remember this happened, right? And I was like, ew.
Yep.
I didn't.
Yeah, it's real.
Thanks so much for reminding me.
It's real weird. So he was using the planar bridge inside of himself to ferry the Phyrexian Praetors around between planes. So that's how Vorinclex was where he was. Jin Gitaxias was where he was, etc. Now Urabrask here. And it was at the direction and or under threat from Elesh Norn. It's unclear. It seems like Tezzeret is also a double agent. Hooray. Because that's not a problem to keep track of. Who's a double agent for who? And anyway. So Tezzeret seems like he's a double agent. He's working for Elesh Norn, but only in so much as he's doing what she wants and then trying to help at least Urabrask. It's unclear if Vorinclex, Jin Gitaxias, etc. are also part of what Urabrask is doing.
Chin Gitaxias.
Chin Gitaxias. See that chin? But it's unclear if they are also a part of it. It's hard for me to tell. But Urabrask basically said that what he is trying to do is, I think I wrote it down. He wants to, he's planning to challenge Elesh Norn's rule, but is currently, like, dying and recuperating on New Capenna here.
And if he goes back, he's gonna be even more dead
yes.
for an even longer period of time.
Even though he has recovered, and he's saying, I think I'm ready to make the trip now, but even then, I'm going to be just as injured on my way back, because I guess Urabrask is more flesh than the others, I suppose. Because the others, it didn't seem like were very injured by the transport. Mm. But as folks may remember, maybe you don't, from Kaladesh and or War of the Spark, living things, or organic beings, cannot transport through the planar bridge. Now, Phyrexians, who are part metal, mostly metal, right, like are part machine, can theoretically transport through the planar bridge, but they also have fleshy parts. And so that was the issue with Urabrask here.
And they kind of get left behind.
Is that his fleshy parts, I think the phrase that they used was like it looked like it had been seared off of him.
Yeah.
Right? And
but
so
imagine how the other place looks. It's just like a pile of like, ugh.
See, I actually assumed, because the planar bridge, it's not like that it just opens a door. Like I think you travel through the multiverse, right, to like get there. So, or the blind eternities or whatever it's called.
Right.
So maybe all of those parts of him were left in the blind eternities. There's just like floating flesh and blood, just like going around in the blind
came
eternities.
Off as we started to enter, like it just became like a sinewy pile of like smoking debris.
Gross.
Of
Gross.
Flesh.
No, thank you. I'm good.
Like, well, you know where to come back.
Yeah.
Right to the pile of flesh that you've left behind.
No, thanks.
And then like vultures all on it.
And then the final part of Urbrask's plan seemed to be that he wanted some Halo so that he could study it because it's just an interesting substance to him, and he wanted Elspeth because, as we alluded to earlier, Elish Norn afraid of Elspeth, and so Urbrask wants to talk to Elspeth so that presumably Elspeth can be kind of recruited to help in the effort against Elish Norn and her evil plans. But that Tezzeret didn't approach Elspeth because of their prior relationship, and so it needed to be Vivian, and Vivian barely knew Elspeth at all, but again, as we said, Vivian wanted to know Elspeth because of Elish Norn's proclivity, or fear of her, I should say. And so Vivian wants to know her in order to be able to, try to work together or whatever. And it kind of goes along with this phrase or this quote that I wrote down. Vivian could walk away at any point with what she already knew and relay Urbrask's revelations to the others. Now, I was asking Amy, I was like, can you work this out with me? Maybe I'm just missing something. Who would the others be? And like you came to sort of the same conclusion that I did.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, well, it could be the Gatewatch, but if it is, we don't know yet. So it's just that they haven't told us, but we're going to find out.
Right. And so sure enough, later on when Vivian and Elspeth finally meet face to face, which we saw in a prior main story, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, but when they finally meet, Vivian kind of says, who are you here gathering information for? Is it the Gatewatch? And Elspeth's like, oh yes, a Johnny sent me. And so like, it does seem like that's who the others were,
right,
that Vivian's referring to here, but similarly to what Elspeth is doing, it seems like Vivian wants to stay to try to gather more information so that they can be kind of more prepared for whatever coming conflict is very obviously coming.
Right. I still think it's a little suspect because I feel like from a characterization standpoint, Elspeth would have said a Johnny. She would not have said the others.
No, Elspeth didn't. Vivian said.
Vivian did. Okay.
Yeah, that's the quote from Vivian, right? Because we didn't hear anything from Elspeth's perspective.
Yeah, okay.
And this quote was just saying Vivian could at any... So it wasn't... That's not a
right,
dialogue.
Then that's fine, I guess.
Yeah.
But like you said, Vivian's not really one to like join the team, So kind of in either respect, it feels a little off to have them be like, well, I'll report back to the others.
Maybe.
Yuck.
It's kind of interesting, right? I mean, they're trying to, unfortunately, as a fan of Nissa, as you are, it seems like they're moving away from Nissa as the female green planeswalker and bringing Vivian in. So I think I don't work with anybody, I'm a lone wolf, can't stay for very long.
Right.
And so the way that they're going about it, I don't hate it. Like, I think I can forgive she's a lone wolf, she only works by herself, but here are all these instances from now on where she will solely be working with other people, right? Like, so I get it. It like we said, it's kind of a little like forced in there, but once it's in there, you're like, okay, I get it. I can like work with it in my timeline.
Don't get me wrong. I much more appreciate it if she is working as part of a team as opposed to doing the age-old, tired old, I'm a lone wolf BS. Because we hear that in every single story of every single media that there is out there, and it's terrible every time, and it's rote, and it's old, and I don't care.
Well, and the cliched aspects of it really would be like one of two things would happen. Either she would get like a ton of bravado and would go out there and fight and just die or almost die.
Right.
And if she died, obviously that would just be one thing. But if she almost died, that would be what kind of turned her around to like, okay, I guess I need help.
But that would have been a Gideon thing.
Or, right, and that happened to Gideon,
Exactly,
absolutely.
that's what I'm saying.
Or she would go out there with perfectly good intentions, doing what she thought made the most sense, and messing up the rest of the good guys' plans with what she was doing,
right.
because they had a whole other thing planned, and then she kind of throws a wrench in and they have to either give up or maybe they lose somebody because of it, and that's what gets her in there. So like, yes, you're right. We don't need any of that because off the top of my head, I just told you what would happen.
It's a story that's been written a million times before. It never gets any newer.
You could say it's a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
Beauty and the Beast. Anyway, so the one of the things that I wanted to talk about, I said we would come back to it, and
Is that
here we
like
are.
Elspeth and a Johnny?
Elspeth and a Johnny. That actually is probably not that wrong. I mean, they're not in love in that way, but still, like those two characters seem like not romantically, but yes, absolutely correct. One of my personal favorite, when it's done correctly, and I think that this like gets most of the way there, one of the things that I love in storytelling is when you can take a story that we have already read and come back to it in some form of a flashback or a lead up with a different character and get a different perspective from somebody that we may not have even known was there.
Right. I love that kind of thing.
I do, a lot. And like I said, especially when it's done well. And I think here we're like 50% of the way there. I didn't have a problem with it. I've just seen it done amazingly well, and this was not that. So I didn't have any problems with it. It just didn't blow me away, but I still enjoyed it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I loved the moment of like Vivian being like, well, I have to look for Elspeth. I have a little bit of information from Navy, who said that there is a woman who says her name is Elspeth taking odd jobs around town in this particular area. And so Vivian is going around that area looking for the person taking the odd jobs. And as she's walking around looking, there's an explosion. And both of us are like, oh, interesting. And then there's a woman running away pursued by Maestro enforcers. And I'm like, there it is. We're at the fight that Elspeth was having with the Maestro enforcers from the cleaners, where she like stepped in to protect her boss.
Right.
And then kind of ran away from them, but then was able to take them down later on, met up with Angelo, and we see all of that from Vivian's perspective this time, where we had no knowledge from reading Elspeth's perspective, because again, Elspeth and Vivian don't technically know each other. So Vivian knows that Elspeth is there because of Urabrask and is looking for her because of that. But Elspeth would have no idea who Vivian is or to look for her. So when going out into a street, especially when running away from three people who are trying to kill you,
right,
you're not going to be panning the crowd and saying, that person seems a little out of place, right? And then identify them in like the point where...
I'll run to them. They'll surely help.
Well, not even that, but I just mean like where in the story she could have been placed there, right? If this were a like filmed thing, mm-hmm. you might have been able to see her, or I guess you could go back and be like, oh, well, now that the Vivian video has come out, we see that she was standing in this spot. But if you go back and look in the Elspeth video, when they pan the crowd, she's not standing right there, right? And so that's the kind of thing where, like, in a video type situation, if they don't plan that stuff ahead, it's very obvious that it wasn't planned ahead. Right. Whereas here, who the hell knows? They could have shoehorned Vivian into that spot, or it could have always been known that she was there to see that, and that's why that was more of a public spectacle, because they wanted it to be able to be seen by Vivian without her just having to be at the right place at the right time.
Right.
Or that much. I mean, she kind of was, but still, there were a lot of people on that street at that time. So, so I liked that. And then that's again where we kind of were like, and now we know why 2 weeks ago, or last week? I guess it was last week. It was last week. I wrote, and I have it right here in my notes, I literally wrote here, how did Vivian get to pursuing this lead from working with Tezzeret and the Phyrexians? And I wrote it because I was like, that makes no sense. And I'm going to be cool, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say, that makes no sense. That's stupid, Wizards. What are you even thinking? Well, that's what I get. The answer is right here. And so, great job. Yeah. Amazing job. Because now it makes perfect sense. Why Vivian steps up, why she says what she says. It happens here again, so we get to see it again, but from a slightly different perspective. Super well done. And again, like we said, I love that aspect of storytelling. You were just saying you like that as well. Just being able to put those two characters from very opposite sides of a story and bring them together and seamlessly work it where it makes sense, even with something that you've put in there where we're going, wait, why? Why is she there right now? That doesn't make sense. And now it makes perfect sense. So like, yeah, I loved that. I really appreciate it. Nicely done. Okay, and so that's why, that's another thing of why I'm glad we do these reviews the way that we do them.
Okay.
Because we could have done this, main story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, side story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we didn't. We're doing it in the order that they were released, which is main story 1, side story 1, main story 2, side story 2. And because of that, this is the time that we were paid off for it, right? I don't think that we've had that payoff any other time,
right?
To my knowledge.
Right.
But here, we're actually paid off for it because...
And it feels chronological and correct.
Yes. And again, it feels like we were rewarded for it. Because if we had done, like this is side story number 3, and the last week was main story number 2. So if we had done it in that other order, it would have been main story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that'd be 3 stories at the end after main story 2. Then we do side story 1 and 2, and then 3. Well, now we have to remember at side story 3 back to 5 stories ago when the initial portion of this story was told.
Right.
So I'm glad that we were able to review them in the order that they were released, and I'm glad that that release schedule being the way that it is, while it's dumb that they do it day after day after day like that, it's great that it was planned seemingly correctly so that the side story would come out, the payoff side story for a portion of that main story came out immediately the next day after, or as the next story after that main story. I appreciated that, and I think that was super well done. Okay. We hear, again, a little bit more about Halo and what Halo can do. I think the quote here is that, like, it gives false strength, that if you have that false strength, you risk becoming overconfident. And this is from Vivian, again, because that's the whole story. And Vivian says that she needs her wits about her kind of now more than ever kind of a thing. And so she is not interested in imbibing on a lot of this Halo. She tried it once out of pure curiosity and never again. She was like, nope, definitely not for me. Again, it definitely does kind of further allude to this is alcohol, you know, or like a drug of some kind.
A controlled substance
Yes.
or something.
Yeah. Which, again, for the folks who were upset by Wizards' implication that, like, game stores should have Halo around just to, like, rep the set, like, when you hear about this, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Originally, with the way that they were describing it, I didn't have as big of a deal, or I didn't think it was as big of a problem, but when this is what you're describing your Halo does, you want your stores being like, yeah, come on, kids, or,
so messed up.
you know, I mean, kids, right? 13-year-olds
Still.
and up, but
Not
yes,
okay.
still, yes.
Not
Because
okay.
because don't forget, 13 to 17, still kids. I didn't mean to, like, imply that they're not.
Adults or not. There are addicts, many addicts out there that need to not be exposed to that kind of nonsense.
It's true.
Going to play Magic.
It's true. It's true.
They have enough exposure to that kind of nonsense going other places,
Right.
trying to socialize with people who are going to bars and all kinds of other stupid shit.
Well, I was just going to say, like...
they shouldn't have to be exposed to that going to an LGS to play Magic. It's just absurd.
I agree. Yeah, especially because, like, you would think that an LGS would be a safe place to go to if you're not able to or comfortable with going to bars. Right. And so, yes, this would be
going to certain people's homes who you know are going to have way too much alcohol at the house, and therefore everyone who comes over is going to have way too much alcohol for themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Alcohol or any other type of substance that is, you know,
triggering to people or whatever.
In those
Absolutely.
Situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, thematically it makes sense. So we're talking about an era that the history of the prohibition is so, I mean, it makes so much sense, right? The rich people and the powerful people are the people who had alcohol and were able to, like, skirt around the laws and have speakeasies and things like that. And the people who weren't rich and powerful were, you know, making it out of poisons and drinking it until they died. You know, like, you know, so that's a much more risque and triggering and terrifying sort of thing to think about and talk about than just referencing it here. So I kind of see both sides of it. It's alluding to the history without going deep into the, like, really, really dark parts of that history, but also, like, don't suggest that LGSs have anything to do with that.
Sure.
You know, it's one thing to reference it in the story, and then if somebody's triggered by it, they can just stop reading. You know, but it's another to bombard people when they enter a store with something that could be triggering, and now they either feel like they can't leave or feel like they have to leave.
Yeah.
When they shouldn't have to feel like that.
Yeah. Then we get a bit of talk about the adversary. In fact, a fair amount. I think more in this story than any other so far, except for if you count, like, the portion of that one story that ended with Ob Nixilis, right, in that section. But we find out that Navy, who Vivian has been getting information from, and this maestro that Vivian was pursuing, who she was hoping would be Elspeth, but it wasn't, coming to this lounge or whatever it was called. The two of them meet in the back, and Vivian is able to kind of slink back there and listen to their conversation, and they imply, and we kind of had a chat about this, they kind of imply, like, oh, you know, there will be other people there who are loyal to the boss. And now this is an Obscura and a Maestro talking about the boss.
Right.
And so you were like, oh, so this Maestro is part of the Obscura? And it was like, no, think about it more. And
then I was like, oh, so who the heck is it?
Because we've heard from past stories, it didn't mention in this one, but we've heard from past stories that what the adversary is doing is pulling people from other families to himself.
Right.
And to surround him either through promise of power or through just bribes of Halo or proof that he has more Halo or is going to have more Halo than anybody else. And so they're jumping ship because, you know, trying to see the writing on the wall kind of a thing. And
well, and so that's an important thing for him to do as an asshole trying to come in and usurp power.
Yep.
He's dividing, right?
Yeah.
He's saying all of you people who have these strict loyalties to these guilds or houses or families, well, you shouldn't have strict loyalty to them anymore. Have loyalty to me, and then that gets them alone. You know, it's a very like cult leader-esque thing to do. That gets them alone, and then you can recruit them to your army of people, right? And then you can have all the power and these individual families that had power before are now in tatters, and so they're losing their power, and you're gaining a bunch of power, and then it makes it that much easier for you to finish beating them down so you can take over.
Well, I think it's even worse than that, because it seems like not only is he recruiting these people, but keeping them in their families at the same time. So they're still gathering information for him. They're still letting him know how to exploit weaknesses or whatever the case may be. And so that might even allow him to recruit more followers, because now the followers that he has are saying, oh, well, so-and-so wasn't very happy at our last meeting. So, he usually walks home alone this day. If somebody could get to him and talk to him, that might be a good time to try to convert him or recruit him or whatever. So yeah, it's just, it is able to build and build and build and kind of take these families down from the inside, and then eventually, actually from the outside of Obnixilis, showing up and, I don't know, maybe murdering somebody, on the card Murder, where the poor maestros get taken care of, and that's unfortunate.
The mob doesn't murder anyone, right?
Yeah, they whack them. It's different.
Exactly.
Give them a pair of cement shoes. Anyway. But I liked that when Navy has that fight with Vivian, it's not much of a fight, but when Navy attacks Vivian, Navy says, the boss doesn't like that you're getting too close to him, or that you're coming knocking on his door, essentially.
You're sniffing around his business.
And earlier in the night, Vivian had been walking by an area and a secret door opened, and she heard laughing coming from inside that unsettled her, because it sounded familiar.
Right.
Well, Obnixilis was there during War of the Spark, so I think that was him in that lounge. He had that secret back door. He was there. He was meeting with people, and that was the laugh that she heard. People may be saying, yeah, duh, Joe, what the hell? That's fair, but for people who may not have known, that's what I believe it is. I'm in fact relatively certain.
Yeah, I think it's almost 100% that's what they're trying to say.
And especially because Vivian doesn't know that the adversary is Obnixilis.
Right.
We all know that, but Vivian doesn't know that. And when she hears from Navy, I think it had to have been Navy, I don't know who the hell else it would have been, asking her, who is the adversary? And Navy gets scared and says, it's the demon. And Vivian says, well, that's not helpful. Or thinks that's not helpful. It's but then immediately says, but that laugh was so familiar. You know what I mean? So yes.
So how many demons do you know?
And yet, right, exactly, because it's so familiar to you. So yeah, she's getting to that point of knowing. And then the story just ends with her kind of properly, as a story should do, kind of dictating when we will see her next. Because maybe it's the next side story, but I imagine we will just see her next in a main story when she and Elspeth meet up, because the main story is likely going to then be told from Elspeth's perspective, and we're just going to get to see her meet up with Vivian during the crescendo or something like that, and we will get to find out what's going on with this font and etc. Because next week we will have, main story number 3. Nope, main story number 4. I could look it up. It's right here. And it'll tell me, because I write things down. This is, it'll be main story number 4 next week. I'm just throwing stuff everywhere. Yeah. So that is where we will be next episode. I said next week. It'll be next week at some point. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of all I had to say. I don't know if you had more.
I have a couple things.
Please, absolutely. Go right ahead.
I have one thing, I guess.
Please.
Before you referenced Vivian's instincts, and then her kind of going against them a little bit to try and further her pursuits. And that was really the only thing in this that in any kind of way kind of brings me to a point where I can talk about mental health stuff, which I kind of try to do in every episode, but if it's not present in the story, I can't.
Right. That's why I said I didn't feel like there was a lot of metaphor here to talk about, so please go for it.
There's not a lot of analysis of this story either, because they were, pretty upfront about what was happening, which is also great.
Yeah, I appreciated all the questions that they answered. It needed to be done, and I liked that they did it.
But yeah, I mean, the only thing that kind of ties back into that sort of a theme is the part where Vivian uses the word alarm bells, like you said.
Yep.
And that's very much something that my therapist would talk about, or if you listened to Tara Brock or somebody like that on YouTube videos or something, where they would reference in the Body Keeps the Score, which is a really good book. I forget the name of the guy who wrote it.
But people can look it up. Just Google "The Body Keeps the Score."
Right.
You'll find it.
You'll find it. And there are 2 editions now, I think, of that book. It's a great one. But it's not really for people who have no idea about the concept. You kind of have to know a lot about it in order to understand a lot of the jargon and stuff like that he uses. But in there, he refers to that sort of thing as, or not alarm bells, but like your ability to sense into whether something should set off those alarm bells or not.
Okay.
He refers to that as a watchtower. And kind of talks about how when you are a traumatized person, it becomes very difficult for you to make that determination in a logical way, because you've been traumatized. So what you're doing is either applying that alarm bell system to everything, or you're not doing it nearly enough, right?
Okay.
So because your watchtower has basically been defeated by this traumatic event that like ruined your watchtower, so now your watchtower can't determine when it makes sense for you to have these alarm bells going off and when it doesn't make sense for you to do that. And I thought it was interesting that they talked about her alarm bells going off and then her kind of like being aware of it, disregarding it enough to like try to get done what she's trying to get done, but still like being aware of it, talking about it, and like trying to still sort of navigate and make sure that she's in like a good zone. Like if it's uncomfortable, it's not too uncomfortable.
Right.
And that's really the kind of thing that I learned a lot about in therapy and reading these books and things like that, is that a lot of times those alarm bells are not going off when they should be. In this case, they were going off when they should have been. And she wasn't really listening to them, but she also was. And so she was applying enough awareness to the fact that it was happening enough to then like make a choice, as opposed to having whatever that watchtower was saying determine for her what her actions were going to be.
Yeah, which is interesting because it was her alarm bells, which you would argue is her instinct, but then it was a voice that was like a tiny voice inside of her that was telling her, no, give it a chance, whatever.
Right.
So that was also her instinct. So it's like a little bit of both, that like,
Right.
the tiny voice as opposed to like the big alarm bells, and yet she was able to like hone in on the tiny voice and say like, I'm gonna, something's telling me I'm gonna listen to that tiny voice.
Yeah.
And it seemingly so far has worked out pretty
Right.
well in her favor.
Well, we'll
so.
see.
Exactly. We're
We'll
not at the
see.
end yet, but yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, and the whole like point of parts work really, which I've talked about in a lot of these episodes, is trying to like listen to those warring things going on in your mind enough to be able to determine what actually makes sense, so that that warring, that back and forth doesn't have to happen. So yeah, I mean, that kind of coincides with the Watchtower a little bit, because when the alarm bells are constantly going off, the warning is, this is unsafe, and therefore I'm not doing it. And so then you can't get anything accomplished because you're unwilling to do those things because they're too scary.
Right.
Right? And then when it's the opposite, my alarm bells are never going off, even when they ought to be.
Yeah.
Then you're getting yourself into trouble constantly because you're doing all kinds of unsavory things.
Yeah.
Because you don't have something telling you, this is an unsafe situation, you need to get out of here. So yeah. That's kind of really the only thing that was in this story that they kind of alluded to that topic in any kind of capacity. So
yeah, I kind of forgot to mention we had a we had a Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice moment in this story for just a second, where Vivian is talking to Elspeth, and Elspeth is like, you know, Vivian's like, what are you doing here on this plane or whatever, and Elspeth says, well, you know, this might be my home, or might have been my home, and Vivian thinks, like, gets sad for a moment and is like, oh, a lost home plane, you know, and for like a half a second it was like, why did you say that name? Like, it just went, that's all that ran through my head was when I read that.
I have Martha Mommy too.
Scala, why did you say that name? So like, yeah, why did you say that it's your lost home? That's exactly what I thought of.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that we had that moment as well, but it may be used as a reason why Vivian trusts Elspeth outside of just Elish Norn is afraid of her. But also, there's a thing that, you know, this woman is just here trying to learn more information about her home, right?
Yeah.
And so to Vivian, that's somebody who could understand that. And so, yeah, I appreciated it, but again, there's still that kind of comedy and ridiculousness aspect that I friggin' thought of Ben Affleck screaming at Henry Cavill or whatever the hell.
Everything has to be a meme, unfortunately.
So yeah, that as far as we're concerned is going to be the end of this particular video. But thank you all so very much for watching. As always, with anything that we've talked about in this story, in any video that we ever do, we want to hear from you in the comments. Yes, Amy mentioned earlier, engagement is super important, but for this series in particular, I was trying to think of the word, but this series in particular, it's super important because we want the conversation to keep going, right? Our thoughts and our opinions are not the end-all be-all for these stories. So if you think differently, if you feel the same and you want to say, hey, I thought I was the only one that felt that way, whatever the case may be, we would love, love, love to hear from you in the comments down below.
Please, especially if you caught something that you feel like we missed.
Big time. Big time.
Really want to hear from you in the comments about whatever that thing is, because a lot of times when people do that in the comments for us, we go, oh, and it really clears up a big section of what we were confused about, or it completely changes our perception of how things went in the story or whatever. So it's really good to do that if you can.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. And showing us when we're dumb, not necessarily, that's unfair. I'm being self-deprecating, but giving us a heads up when we've either missed something or we've misinterpreted, because, you know, we're just people interpreting a story. So misinterpretations can occur, and there are times where we've heard from other people who are like, wow, I never even thought of that before. And so we've helped others do the exact same thing. But it's a great way for you to join us as we all show off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. Super important, and it's nice, again, to be like part of a community and discussing these things, during our live stream that I mentioned that we did. We were talking about the soundtrack or whatever you want to call it, the playlist for Streets of New Capenna, the songs that came out, and there were people in chat who were like, "Oh man, I was wondering if we were going to talk about that. I loved it." So like that too, like anything that people want to talk about, come to the live streams. Write it in the comment section down below. We'll talk about whatever you want.
Right.
Within reason. But it's like, you guys said you would talk about this. It's like, yeah, but that's way over. Anyway. So yeah, we would love to see you. We would love to hear from you. So we would love for you to come join us for more of these videos in the coming weeks. So definitely, as I mentioned at the beginning, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notified whenever any of these videos come out, whenever we go live, Mondays and Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. And you can do the same on our other channels, Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. Links down in the description box below. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.